Welcome to our session on 3 must-have features of effective instruction for students with word reading difficulties, including dyslexia. Why this topic? Well, we are in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, and this pandemic has led to a very abrupt change in schooling that began in the spring of 2020 and continues as students begin school this fall. This has led to large gaps in instruction and challenges with connecting with all students regularly. Students with word reading difficulties will need increased attention as we move into the school year, and we will really need to leverage our instructional time to focus on features of effective instruction that specifically address word reading difficulties. We have 4 objectives for today's session. First is that you understand an underlying framework for conceptualizing reading. Second is that you are able to define the primary characteristics of dyslexia and explain the source of word reading difficulties. Third is that you will state the formula for word reading success. And finally, based on that formula, that you're able to describe components of effective instruction and intervention for students with word reading difficulties, including dyslexia. First, a little bit about pivot learning. Pivot learning has over 20 years of experience working with districts to drive continuous improvement. Pivot's mission is to partner with educators to design and implement solutions to their greatest challenges in achieving educational justice. And Pivot is committed to improving teaching and learning. CORE, the Consortium on Reaching Excellence in Education, is a subsidiary of Pivot, and CORE also has over 20 years of experience working with districts. CORE works with districts to deliver curriculum implementation services that are aligned to specific high-quality English language arts and math instructional materials. Many of you may be familiar with CORE's nationally recognized textbooks, the Teaching Reading Sourcebook and Assessing Reading Multiple Measures. CORE was founded by the California State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Bill Honig, and Linda Diamond back in 1995. And CORE provides professional learning, face-to-face and remote training and site implementation support to improve literacy and math instruction. At CORE, we believe that if the goal is improved student achievement, there are 3 components that are necessary. One is we need to ensure that teachers have the foundational knowledge needed to teach reading and math based on the science. 2, that teachers have research-based instructional tools, including both curriculum and assessments, in their hands. And 3, that teachers, coaches, and administrators are provided job-embedded support. When these 3 components are in place, we can truly improve student achievement. A little bit about myself. My name is Carrie Thomas Beck, and I am the Director of Literacy at CORE. Prior to coming to CORE, I worked for several years at the Oregon Department of Education as the Dyslexia Specialist for the state of Oregon. I've also been a faculty member at the University of Oregon for more than 10 years, where I founded and directed a reading clinic and taught literacy courses within the College of Education, in addition with doing outreach to local school districts. So let's get started with our learning objectives. I wanted to start again by providing a conceptual framework for how we look at reading. So what I'm presenting here is The Simple View of Reading by Goff and Tunmer, which has been around since the mid-'80s. And this basically provides a framework for understanding the reading process and for pinpointing the source of reading difficulties. And this then will help guide our instruction and intervention. So what you can see here is that it's a pretty simple formula. If the goal is reading comprehension, then students need to have both strong word recognition skills and strong oral language comprehension skills. If there are weaknesses in one or both of these areas, that will result in difficulties with reading comprehension. So we can take this formula and move it into table form to help us identify 4 different profiles of reading. So what you can see is we have word recognition. That part of the formula is here on the left-hand side of the table, and language comprehension is at the top of the table. So for example, if you have a student with strong word recognition skills and strong language comprehension skills, that student would be on track to becoming a typically developing reader. If you have a student with weak word recognition skills, but strong oral language comprehension, that profile would be considered to be the dyslexic profile. And we will be talking a lot about students who show risk factors for dyslexia or who are identified as having dyslexia in our session. So again, what is dyslexia? The short definition is the term dyslexic is used to refer to students with adequate oral language comprehension, but weak word recognition or decoding skills. There is a longer definition of dyslexia, and this is the definition that was adopted by the International Dyslexia Association back in 2002. It's also the definition that is used by the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development. And you can see that there are several components to this definition. And while we don't have time to go into depth into each component, I did want to highlight a couple pieces here. One is that what makes dyslexia, one of the things that makes dyslexia unique is that these difficulties with word reading are quite unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and happen in spite of the provision of effective classroom instruction. So that's really important to remember. And the other point I wanted to stress about this definition is that these difficulties with word reading, they typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. And I want to talk to you about what we mean by that. So this phonological core deficit typically consists of a number of different characteristics. First is a student is likely to have poor phonemic awareness, and this includes poor phonemic blending abilities. Also, poor rapid automatized naming. And what we mean by this is the ability to quickly and efficiently retrieve verbal information from long-term memory. The phonological core deficit also typically includes poor phonological working memory. And this essentially is the ability to hold phonological information in memory long enough in order to be able to do something with that information. And we often assess phonological working memory through a non-word repetition task, for example. And then finally, the phonological core deficit absolutely is characterized by poor non-word reading skills, as well as poor letter sound skills. So again, in our session, we will be focusing on students with word reading difficulties. This includes students with both weak word recognition skills and strong oral language comprehension, as well as those students with weak word recognition skills and weak oral language comprehension skills, or students with mixed reading difficulties. So let's move ahead and talk about principles for guiding instruction and intervention for students with word reading difficulties. So first of all, the most important takeaway is that the best practice for providing instructional support for students with word reading difficulties, including dyslexia, is to make sure that we provide evidence-based, explicit, systematic reading instruction across all tiers of instructional support. And this means that we must start with a strong core reading program. So what do we teach in that core reading program? Well, back in 2000, the National Reading Panel published their report, and what they identified based on a review of decades of reading research is that our core programs need to focus on the 5 essential elements in beginning reading. And these include phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. In our session, we'll be because we're focusing on students with word reading difficulties, we will hone in on the first 3 essential elements: phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency. And in doing so, I wanted to share with you a formula for word reading success. So back in 2015, David Kilpatrick published a book called Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties. And in this book, David Kilpatrick describes his work in reanalyzing the results of existing reading research to determine what are the components that are most effective in reading intervention. And he identified those components in this formula for word reading success. Basically, the formula consists of 3 parts. One is we need to provide instruction on phonemic awareness and be sure to teach phonemic awareness to the advanced level. 2, we need to teach and reinforce phonics skills and phonic decoding. 3, we need to provide ample opportunities for students to apply these developing skills to reading connected text. So let's reflect a minute on this formula. My question is, most of the elements of Kilpatrick's formula may not be surprising to you, but is there a part of this formula that perhaps you were not aware of? I ask this because when I first learned about this formula several years ago, I didn't know of the importance of teaching phonemic awareness to the advanced level. That was new information to me. So now that you know the formula, let's hone in on our 4th learning objective, and that is to make sure that you're able to describe components of effective instruction and intervention for students with word reading difficulties, including dyslexia. Let's dive in. So going back to the first part of Kilpatrick's formula, provide instruction on phonemic awareness and teach to the advanced level. I wanted to start by making the distinction between what we mean by basic phonemic awareness skills and advanced phonemic awareness. So basic phonemic awareness skills simply means phoneme blending and phoneme segmentation. And these skills are typically acquired by the time students are beginning 1st grade. Advanced phonemic awareness would include tasks that manipulate phonemes. So this includes phoneme deletion, substitution, and reversal. And advanced phonemic awareness skills continue to develop all the way up into 3rd grade. Let me show you some examples. So one of the things that's important to remember is that even though these are advanced phonemic awareness skills, we can actually begin introducing them way back in pre-K and kindergarten. And we do so by working at the compound word level and at the syllable and on-site rhyme level before we get into the phoneme level. So as an example, in pre-K and kindergarten, we can do deletion at the syllable level, and it would look something like this. Say under, drop un, what's left? And the students would say der. If you look at some on-site rhyme level examples, let's look at a substitution example. So you would say not, change n, t, new word, and students would say hot. So then we work our way all the way to the phoneme level, to the point where students can delete and substitute within blends, consonant blends at the end of words. So let's do one more deletion example. Listen, say best, drop s, what's left, and students would say bet. What Kilpatrick says about our core or our tier 1 instruction is that given the minimal time investment involved in phonological awareness training relative to its potential benefits, it seems to make the most sense to provide whole class or small group tier 1 instruction to all students. And when we provide this phonemic awareness instruction in our core instruction, we want to make sure that we begin by teaching phonemic awareness as a discrete oral and auditory-based skill. But then as students' phonological awareness skills develop, they must be integrated with letter sound knowledge and word reading. So let's move on to the second part of Kilpatrick's formula for word reading success, and that is that we teach and reinforce phonics skills and phonic decoding. And what Kilpatrick means by this is to decrease the number of students who experience difficulty with reading. We need to make sure that we provide systematic, explicit phonics instruction in our tier 1 instruction. So what do we mean by systematic and explicit phonics? Well, research that has come out since the report from the National Reading Panel suggests that phonics instruction with an initial focus on the grapheme phoneme level relationships rather than larger unit phonics approaches can lead to better reading outcomes. So let's take a closer look at this. So what do we mean by grapheme phoneme level relationships? Those would be programs that actually start by teaching the sounds for each individual letter or letter pair. So for example, they teach that the letter A makes the sound A, or the long sound is A, and the letter T makes the sound T. This would be in contrast to those programs that start by teaching clusters of letters, like sounds for the clusters of letters, or sounds for word families. So AT says at, or AMP says amp, and then immediately having them read lamp, ramp, tramp, camp, and damp as whole words. When we're teaching phonic decoding, we need to make sure that we teach letter sound knowledge to the level of proficiency. And that means that when you display a letter, the students, without hesitation, can say the sound. That sound is A, or that sound is T. Also, this means teaching oral blending to sound out unfamiliar words. Cat says cat. So what might a systematic explicit phonics sequence look like? Typically, these sequences last about 30 minutes, and they would include a number of steps. And it would start with a step where you focus on phonemic awareness, and specifically, we want to present a variety of phonemic awareness activities to help students make sense of the alphabetic principle and develop their phonics skills. So this would be where we integrate letter sounds into our phonemic awareness activities. We would then move on to introducing sound spellings. And this is where we would teach phonics elements explicitly in isolation. So we might review sound symbol associations learned in previous lessons, and then introduce new letter sound associations and practice them. Step 3, where we blend words, here's where we provide explicit instruction and ample practice in sounding out and reading words. So students would read phonetically regular words with letter patterns already taught in isolation and in word lists. And we also need to make sure that we develop automatic recognition of irregular words in this part of our sequence. Fourth is to build automatic word recognition. And here's where we develop automaticity through practice of decoding and reading words in isolation, so that we can then move to step 5, which is applying skills to decodable text. And students read controlled or decodable text to develop fluency here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then finally, step 6 in our phonics sequence is to make sure that we provide word work for students to practice decoding and encoding. So in this step of our sequence, students would spell dictated sounds, they would build, manipulate, and sort words. They also would have the opportunity to spell and write words and sentences from dictation using those same words that they were practicing in word reading earlier in the sequence. Now, this particular explicit systematic phonics sequences is found in CORE's Teaching Reading Sourcebook, and I encourage you to take a look at that for a more in-depth description of the sequence and actual formats that you can use. So again, let's take a moment to reflect. So how does this description of an explicit systematic phonics instructional sequence differ from the instruction you're currently providing either in your live or virtual classroom? Is there a step that you're missing? Often what I find is that when we look at core instruction, often the emphasis on encoding or spelling is missing, and that piece is so critical to help reinforce the acquisition of phonics skills, particularly for students with word reading difficulties. So now let's return to our formula for word reading success, and we're moving on to step 3, which is to provide ample opportunities to apply the newly developing skills to reading connected text. And we saw this step as part of our phonics sequence. So when we say decodable text, what we mean is text that consists primarily of words that have sounds that have been introduced and practiced and mastered by students. And also that the text includes irregular words that have been previously introduced and practiced. And this is just an example of some decodable text from freereading.net. And if you're looking for other sources of decodable text, I encourage you to go to this site. So as we kind of wrap up our discussion about what core instruction should look like for students with word reading difficulties, I want to put on our dyslexia lens and think about specifically for students with dyslexia, again, what we're looking for in core instruction. So we want phonemic awareness instruction, and that our core instruction is teaching phonemic awareness to the advanced level. Second, we are looking for highly explicit, systematic, synthetic phonics instruction. And what we mean by synthetic phonics instruction is instruction that, again, teaches each individual letter sound, and then explicitly teaches students how to sound out each letter one at a time, and then blend those letter sounds together to read the word. That's the type of phonics instruction we're looking for in our core programs. We also need to look for explicit spelling instruction, and this includes instruction in common spelling generalizations, as well as morphemic analysis. And what I mean by morphemic analysis is that the program is teaching students prefixes, suffixes, and roots as a strategy to help them to determine the meaning of words. And then finally, that our core programs include ample application of these skills to reading connected text, and specifically that you see opportunities for students to read decodable text. And the good news is that typical students, as well as those with dyslexia, benefit from this kind of instruction. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about intervention. Because what we'll find is that there will be some students who will require additional individualized interventions. And students may be taught in small group settings to increase both the intensity of the instruction and also to individualize the instruction. So let's talk more about intervention. What would it look like for students with word reading difficulties, including dyslexia? Well, what's important is that we need to start with reading instruction based on the science of reading. But then, in the words of Joe Torgeson and colleagues, we need to make that instruction more explicit and comprehensive, more intensive, and more supportive than the instruction provided to the majority of children. Wanted to share another quote. This one is from Dr. Sally Shaywitz, who's the director of the Yale Center on Dyslexia and Creativity. And what Dr. Shaywitz says is that teaching a dyslexic child to read is based on the same principles used to teach any child to read. Since the neural systems responsible for transforming print into language may not be as responsive as in other children, however, the instruction must be relentless and amplified in every way possible so that it penetrates and takes hold. Those are really strong words. Relentless and amplified in every way possible so that it penetrates and takes hold. And then finally, I wanted to share some information specific to dyslexia-specific interventions that was recently published by Jack Fletcher and colleagues. And what Fletcher says is that there's actually little evidence for the specificity of dyslexia interventions. Children with word reading and spelling problems, with and without other proposed markers of dyslexia, respond similarly to these interventions. Thus, the search for dyslexia-specific interventions potentially limits access to effective reading instruction for some children. Let's reflect on those words. So a couple of questions for you to consider. One is, how does the description of instruction for students with dyslexia from these well-known researchers align with your current thinking of dyslexia interventions? Did you believe that students with dyslexia required separate dyslexia-specific interventions? I think the answer is quite clear in that we need to start with instruction based on the science of reading, and again, make that instruction more intensive, more supportive, more comprehensive. We need to make it relentless and amplify it. So what are some ways we can do that? Well, we need to make sure that we provide more instructional time. We need to look at providing smaller group sizes. And importantly, greater explicitness and even more scaffolding from the teacher when we present the instruction. We need to choose interventions that have airtight scope and sequences. And I've linked here, or provided a link here on this slide, to a good example of a scope and sequence from a program called SIPS that you can take a look at. And then also, we need to make sure that we are providing diagnostic teaching to the level of automaticity. And so when we talk about diagnostic teaching, what we mean is that on a day-to-day basis, you are recording the errors that students are making in lessons, and then adjusting lessons the next day to address those errors, because we want to make sure that we're providing enough instruction and practice so that students master the skills to the level of automaticity. So I want to thank you for your time and talk to you a little bit about what's next. We would love it if you would reach out to us about your successes and challenges and provide us some feedback about today's session. Specifically, tell us a little bit about what are your experiences with teaching reading to students with word reading difficulties in this particular school year. How effective do you feel your remote instruction is? What assistance do you need to ensure student success? We would love to feature your scenario in a mini case study, a data study, or blog. So let us know how it's going. I also wanted to let you know that CORE has a number of free resources that may be helpful to you on our website. One resource in particular is a resource library on word reading difficulties, and I've included the link here for you on this slide. But some of the types of resources you'll find in this library are white papers, infographics, articles, videos, recorded webinars, and links to resources for teaching reading both at home and in class. And I have an example here of some of the webinars that are highlighted in this resource library. You can see there's a webinar on understanding dyslexia from Dr. Louisa Motes. We also have highlighted 2 webinars on phonemic proficiency and word level reading problems by David Kilpatrick, if you wanted to learn more about his formula for word reading difficulties. So those are also recorded and available on demand for free in our resource library for you. There's a lot of information there, and I really encourage you to take a look. Also, I wanted to remind you that CORE is available to provide schools and districts remote consulting services, and we can work with your team to address your site's specific goals, challenges, and capacity building needs around both English language arts and mathematics. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us through our website at www.corelearn.com or through Twitter or Facebook, or you can reach out to me directly via email, and my email address is right there. We will make today's slide deck available to you, so please feel free to go back and reference it. And we really hope this information was helpful for you, and we hope to hear from you in the future. Thanks so much.